Do you remember who first welcomed you in a place like this? Before you ever heard about God's love, who showed you genuine kindness the first time that you stepped foot into a Bible study, a student gathering, or a worship experience? And how did that warmth and acceptance affect the way you responded to the story of salvation? And did you ever think about who welcomed that person? Who did for them what they did for you? And who welcomed the person who welcomed the person who welcomed you? You get the idea, right? We all have a spiritual ancestry of welcome. When we help someone belong in a community of believers, we play a vital part in their steps toward faith. It's so simple. Our welcome can actually help a person find God.
So I wanted to start things off this morning with that video because it's really all about inviting people. And we have a couple of great opportunities coming up in the next few weeks to invite people here. As Rick mentioned earlier in the service, tonight we're having a movie night. We're showing Disney's movie Moana. So if you've got friends, kids, grandkids, people that you think might enjoy that, would encourage you and invite them to come. I've heard that there is karaoke. I've actually heard that Steve Lee will be coming back and we'll be singing Let It Go from Frozen. So that's something you guys probably don't want to miss. I may have gotten that message wrong, so don't hold me to that. No, so that's one opportunity. And the other thing, it's not too early to start thinking about Easter. Easter Sunday is less than a month away. And Easter is really a time when people, whatever their faith background, whatever their experience with the church, they may be more open to just coming and learning a little bit more about who we are as a people and what we believe. So I would encourage you to be thinking and praying about who you might want to invite to have come with you on that day. But I am still fairly new here in Corvallis, so some of you guys may not know that I went to seminary in the same small town in Kentucky where I did my undergraduate school, where I went to college. And boy, what can I say about my college years? Let's just say that when I was in college, I had some behavioral challenges that occasionally led to run-ins with the college administration and very occasionally led to running from the two police officers in town in Wilmore. Now, it was never anything really serious or like really illegal. It was just more like, pranks that went too far, things like that. But needless to say, when I graduated from college in '97, there were some people who were probably pretty happy to see my taillights leave Wilmore, Kentucky. Okay, so fast forward about 7 years from my graduation. I'm back in Wilmore. It's the middle of the summer. I'm taking a seminary class. It's really hot and muggy. I want to go for a run, so I figure I better get up early in the morning and go. So it's early in the morning. I go out to start jogging, and Wilmore's a really small town. So it doesn't take long before you're out of town running on like a gravel road. So sure enough, I'm running down this gravel road, and as I'm running this way, one of the police cars from the Wilmore PD passes me going this way. And I don't think anything about it until I hear them slam on their brakes. And you know that sound when like a car spins out on a gravel road, and you hear the gravel flying and like hitting trees? So I hear him turn around, and the cop guns it, and he flies past me, and he does that cop move, where they kind of like park in the middle of the street right in front of you so you can't go anywhere. And I kind of come to a stop, and my first thought was like, they can't still be mad at me, can they? I mean, I don't know if it's the thing with the snowball or the thing with the cow. I mean, that was a long time ago. But to my utter surprise, the door opens up, and out pops Mike Morgan, who is this guy that I graduated from college with. He used to live right across the hall from me. And, when my heart starts beating again, Mike and I, he just recognized me. He just kind of wanted to stop and say hi. I was like, well, thank you for almost killing me. So we start talking. We decide we're going to grab lunch and catch up. So we're kind of catching up on what's happened over the years. And I said, Mike, you got to tell me, how did you end up a police officer in Wilmore, Kentucky? He said, well, this is just sort of one stop on my way to the job that I really want to do. He said, really, Mike, I kicked around after college for a few years, but I realized that what I really want to do is I want to join the Air Force, and I want to be a para-jumper, a para-rescue jumper. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's this really elite force inside the Air Force that basically they parachute behind enemy lines for soldiers who've been shot down and are wounded, and they rescue people. They go into these incredibly dangerous situations and try to save people and bring them out. So I was talking with Mike about all of that and what's involved with that. And he starts telling me, well, that's why I decided to be a police officer. Because as I was reading and doing research, I read that if you serve time in a police force or an EMT, something like that, it can kind of help your application. And I said, what does the application even look like to do that? And he said, well, you enlist, you go through boot camp, and then you go through this amazingly grueling process, to this selection process. And the way he starts describing it, it kind of makes Hell Week that the Navy SEALs go through looks like a cupcake race or something. I mean, these guys are like, these are the people that the SEALs call when they need backup, So he's explaining all this stuff, and he said, being a cop helps with my application. It also gives me time to do all the physical training and the things that I need to do to be ready for this interview process. I was like, Mike, no offense, man, but this seems really hard. And like when you were in college, you were not the kind of person who really ever did anything that was hard. Like going to class and things like that. I said, what's the motivation for you in this? And he's like, Mike, I got to tell you, the first time I read the motto for this group, I was hooked. He says, it's right there on their badge. He says, this group exists so that others may live. Right? That's what they do. They rescue people. Their whole job is to do what they do so that others may live. And the first time I heard that, I was hooked. And I thought, I want to give the best years of my life to doing that. Now, I wanted to start off this morning with that story because it actually ties into the topic that we're going to be talking about today. This morning, we're continuing on in a teaching series where we're looking at sort of what it is that we value as a church. It grew out of some time that the staff and elders spent away a couple of weekends ago where we're thinking and dreaming and praying about the year to come. And part of what we came up with in that time is we settled on some core principles and some core values that we as a church are really committed to continuing to pursue as we move forward. So what we're doing in this series is just kind of sharing those things with you. So last week, we talked about this real value that we have on wanting to be biblically based in all that we do. And if you weren't able to be with us last week, you can catch that sermon online on the website, the app we have. Would encourage you to listen to that to kind of be on the same page. But this morning, what I want to do is continue on by doing that, by talking about the second thing on that list. So, this first core principle for us is being biblically based in all we do. And the second one is being willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel. Okay, we as a people want to be willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel. And if you guys look at this list, there's nothing on here that's new. I mean, these are all things that Suburban has done well over the years. So really what we're trying to do in this year is just build on the strengths that the church already has as we move forward. And these are principles that we're going to be using this year as we plan, as we decide what are we going to do. When we make a budget, when we've got to decide, we can either fund program X or program Y, how do we make that decision? Well, we're going to go back to these core principles and try to say, okay, which program, which decision is going to help us really move towards that thing. So as we do that this year, we're really just kind of building on our strengths. So this morning, I want us to unpack, what does it mean? What does it look like to be willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel? But before we do that, just a word for those of you who may be here with us as visitors today. You might be sitting there thinking like, I have picked like the worst possible day to come and visit this church. I'm not even sure what I believe about Jesus, and I don't know about this church. I'm trying to figure things out. They're talking about being inconvenienced. This is not what I signed up for. If that's you, I just want to make sure you hear two things really clearly. One, we really are glad that you're here. Right? If you're at church for the first time or the first time in a long time, that's kind of a courageous step. And we appreciate the fact that you are willing to give some of your time to be with us here this morning. And second, while, in one sense, this series, it's kind of like a family meeting. It's sort of inside baseball where we're talking about the values and the things that matter the most to us. I get how, in the one sense, it could be a little weird to come in as a visitor and hear that. But, the flip side of that is that this could be really a helpful day for you. Because if you're trying to figure out more about the God we follow or about who we are as a church and whether or not you feel like this is a good fit for you, in that sense, the fact that we're kind of pulling back the curtains and talking about what we really value, that could be a really helpful thing for you as you're trying to figure out what do your next steps in faith look like. So would encourage you to keep that in mind. And to dig into this, I'd like to invite everybody to turn with me in their Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. If you didn't bring a Bible with you this morning, or if you're not sure how to find certain passages in the Bible, somewhere in the chairs around you, there's a red Bible. You can grab that. You can turn to the page number on the screen, and will help you get there. But as you're turning there, let me give you just a little bit of background. So the book that we know as 1 Corinthians is actually a letter. It was a letter that was written in the first century by an early Christian leader named Paul to some young Christians in the Greek city-state of Corinth. And in most of this letter, Paul is basically trying to do problem solving for them. They had kind of gotten a hold of him and said, hey, here's some issues we're facing. So he's kind of working down the list, weighing in on these issues. But when you get to chapter 9, he sort of steps back and starts to talk about himself a little bit more, starts to talk about his motivations and why it is that he does the things that he does. So he's going to talk in just a minute here, starting in verse 19, about decisions that he has made and things that he has done. But he also makes sure to continually come back and highlight the reason that he does these things. So let's start reading together in verse 19. He says, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone. Again, here's the reason: to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. Again, what's the reason for that? So as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law. And again, the reason for that, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. And then it couldn't get any clearer than this. He lays out his reason. He says, I do all of this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. I mean, basically what Paul is doing is he's telling us what's the future that he wants to step into. What's the end goal? What's the reason that he does this? He wants other people to share in the gospel. He wants to share in that. He wants people to know about the life-changing power of Christ. That's the future he wants to get to. And because that's the future he's moving towards, there are certain steps and decisions that he takes in the present. And some of those are very inconvenient for him. They involve sacrifice on his part. But he's willing to make that sacrifice for the sake of the gospel. And then to kind of reinforce this point, he talks about the same thing in a different way, using imagery that comes from sort of the track and field world of the day. So we'll keep reading. He says this. He says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, and just whenever you read the word therefore in the Bible, it's an important word to key in on because it says, what I'm about to say is based on what I just said. So he talks about all these things. He's doing this to get a prize that'll last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I don't fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. You think about all of the work and the sacrifice that is involved in that picture that Paul was just describing for us. Right? He says that everyone who competes in the games, right? Everyone who competes in the games is trying to get a prize. And if you think about it, we know that that's true. I mean, think about athletes and all of the work that athletes do, the sacrifices that athletes are willing to make in order to get to this end goal, right, to win the prize. We see this all the time on TV. So, for example, how many of you guys like to watch the Olympics? Does anybody like to watch the Olympics when it comes on? Yeah, it's crazy. Every 4 years, I am more excited about, like, the luge than I don't think about the luge for 4 years. But once it's on, I am like, I have got to watch every minute of this. It's just captivating. Is that just me? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. No, but so we watch the Olympics. And honestly, one of the things that I love about the Olympics is, you watch the skier doing the run, and then while they're waiting for the scores, they cut over to the sidelines. And you see the person who's getting ready to go on the run next. And you think about all the years of training and effort that has come to this moment, and you wonder, what are they thinking as they're getting ready to do this? Now, in all the times that you've been watching the Olympics, and every time that they cut over onto somebody at the sidelines, how many times when you've seen them do that, have they cut to an athlete, and that athlete has been eating a donut? It just doesn't happen, right? Because athletes know if they want to get to this end goal, there's sacrifice involved. There's work that has to be done. It's true for all athletes, all sorts of elite athletes. Think about NBA players. ESPN did this fascinating series of articles a while ago where they went into the homes of different NBA athletes and had them open up their refrigerator. And they just talked about what was in there. So here's a picture of James Harden, right? James Harden from the Rockets. Used to be with the Oklahoma City Thunder, by the way. So this is James Harden's refrigerator. Like, you look in there, there's Powerades, there's lots of things that are green and red and orange, there's vegetables, there's fruit. There is really nothing fun in James Harden's refrigerator. There's not. He's got a little bit of ranch down in there, but that's a food group in and of itself, so that's okay. But if you think about it, right, athletes that really want to achieve their goals, that are really working towards that, they make sacrifices. They're willing to be inconvenienced because of the goal that they're moving towards. And I think that concept is true for us as well as we move into the year to come as a church. Now, our goal is really different than that, right? We're not trying to win a medal. We're not trying to be in an all-star game. No, instead, what we're driving at is something in a way that's much more important than that. I mean, as the church, we have the incredible privilege of partnering with God in the most important work that is out there, right? Of helping people who are lost and hurting and broken find help and health and healing in the person of Jesus Christ, right? Being a part of agents that see transformation happen in people's lives. We are in the business of partnering with God to see lives changed. And that's exciting. And that's the mission that we have, and that goes way beyond a basketball game. But even though that mission is so important, it's not something that's going to happen on its own, right? We have to make intentional choices to do that. We've got to be committed to doing that. We've got to do the things that help us move that ball down the field. And those kinds of choices and those kinds of decisions, in all likelihood, will be inconvenient. And some of them will really require sacrifice on our part. And as a church, for Suburban, this isn't anything new. Like I said, these values that we're driving into this year, we're building on your strengths. These are things that as a church we've done well in the past. I had a chance to sit down with Steve Lee, who was the senior pastor here for many years, and just kind of talk with him this week and say, Steve, some of these things, like being inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel, I know that's just a core part of Suburban's DNA, but I haven't been around long enough to know some real examples of that. When you think about that and you think about your history here at the church, what comes to mind for you? And it's like I couldn't get him to stop talking. He had example after example after example of the ways that we as a church have done this over the years. So just one example that comes to mind. Did you guys know that for about a decade, Suburban had a Saturday night service, right? Some of you guys, I'm sure, know that. Well, that was pretty inconvenient, right? It was inconvenient for the staff to have to be up here on another day. It was inconvenient for the volunteers who had to sort of rearrange their life and their world and their schedule in order to help make that possible, because we cannot do what we do without the help of dedicated volunteers. But even though that was inconvenient, it was a decision that we as a church were willing to make, because we just realized that there were some people who, for whatever reason, just were never going to come to church on a Sunday morning. Maybe it was the shift that they worked or experiences they've had, and a Sunday morning setting just wasn't going to be a good fit for them. But as a church, we wanted to give those people an opportunity to hear about the gospel. So we were willing to take on that inconvenience, and because of that, many people did get to meet Jesus for the first time. Right? Lives have been changed forever because of that service. Right? Families and the history of families have been changed forever because of what God did through that sacrifice. In fact, some of you guys are here this morning probably because of that Saturday night service. So it's just one example that he could think of. Or just think about even this building. Right? Think about the sacrifice that is involved in building campaigns to buy land and to build a building like this. It costs millions of dollars to build a place like this. That's inconvenient, right? It's a sacrifice to give that. But we as a church, we were willing to do that because at that point on Sunday morning, there just wasn't space for everybody. There were people who wanted to come to have an opportunity to hear about the life-transforming power of Jesus, and there just wasn't space. And because there was such a commitment here to have an opportunity for those people to have space to hear the gospel in a way that they could understand, we were willing to take on that sacrifice and that inconvenience. You know, Steve tells stories about people who would invite people into their homes, their neighbors and friends, just to get to know them and build relationships with them. Or a family who every year hosts a barbecue for everyone in their neighborhood just because they want to get to know their neighbors, to begin to have an opportunity to deepen relationships, to earn the right to share with them what matters most to them. So there's lots of examples of that. Here's an example you guys might not know about. This is one I actually didn't know about until Steve told me. But did you know that one of the very first people that Suburban hired when it was still an itty-bitty church was somebody who was focused on outreach, right? The third employee of the church was someone whose entire job was focused on the needs of people who were not in the church. Now, I can tell you that just the way that churches normally do things, that's a pretty unusual hiring decision, right? Usually when churches are that small, they're really trying to sort of shore up their own infrastructure and get things figured out internally. But again, for the people of Suburban at the time, it was such a commitment to share, to extend the message of the gospel to others, that they took on the inconvenience and the burden of that staffing position, that salary, so that other people would have an opportunity to hear about the gospel message. And for Martha and I, as we were interviewing with you all as a church, and we heard these stories about this incredible legacy of people who were willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel, that was really exciting to us, right? Because that's something that is near and dear to our hearts, and it's something that's near and dear to your heart. So we thought, where do we sign up for this, right? What an incredible privilege to get to come and help lead and be a part of a movement of God like this. Which is why, as with the elders, as we were talking, I got really excited about sharing this idea with you, right? About being able to come together and maybe just say out loud for the first time something that has been a part of how we've operated since the beginning. We are willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel, right? We are willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel. Now, that's not always easy to do, and it's not always fun to do. But it's important to do that. And one of the things that can motivate us to keep going when that gets hard or really inconvenient is just to remember how incredibly important the end goal is, the mission is, right? We're doing this so that others may live, and nothing is more important than that. And that's really what Paul is getting at in this letter, right? If you go back to verse 25, when he's talking about this, he talks about the ways that keeping that end goal in mind helps sustain you in these seasons when the inconveniences, when you feel that more. So in verse 25, he's talking about these guys who do all these things to train for what really is a foot race that kind of just doesn't matter all that much. It's like gym class at school. So he says this. He says, these guys, all the sacrifice, all the work they do, he says they do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, again, such an important word, because we are driving at this crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body, and I make it my slave. And again, this is the work that people do just to win a race. But the goal that we have is so much bigger than that. It is so much more meaningful and lasting than that, helping people find new life in Jesus Christ. And when we can keep that goal in mind, then the sacrifices are really worth it. They really aren't that much of a sacrifice when you think about it that way. And that's really what motivated my buddy Mike, the policeman, when he was thinking about all that he had to do. Remember, we were sitting there at lunch that day, and I was talking to him about just his incredibly crazy schedule, getting up to swim, lifting weights, all these things that he was doing. Like, he's eating like the healthiest meal that I've ever seen anybody eat in their 20s. And I said, Mike, are you sure it's worth it? I mean, this is a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of work. Is it really worth it? He said, Mike, you're forgetting what the whole goal of this group is. They're there to rescue people. They do what they do so that others may live, right? So that others may live. He said, Mike, that is a mission worth sacrificing for. That is a mission worth giving for. And God forbid if it comes to it, that is even a mission that is worth dying for, just as many people have died so that I can enjoy the freedom to choose to do this. So yes, it is worth it. It's worth it. I'll get up early to swim. I'll eat the right things while I'm training. I will even work at a job that I don't really like all that much because it's going to help me meet my goal. They do what they do so that others may live, and I want to do. I'll sacrifice anything to be a part of that. And that's the kind of sort of single-minded focus on that goal, on that mission, that I want to encourage us to always keep in front of us as a church this year. As we move forward, we do what we do not to win a prize, not to win a race. We do what we do so that others may live. And when we can keep that in mind, the inconveniences we're called to do, the sacrifices we're called to make don't seem all that important. Because in the moment, they can seem like a really big deal. Because for me personally, I don't know about you guys, I'm not a big fan of being inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of anything. I just don't like being inconvenienced. And yet, as we move down this road, there will be sacrifices. Right? You may end up coming to a worship service at a time that's different than the one that you would prefer because somehow that creates space or an environment so that other people can come and learn. Or maybe you come to a service and you walk away a little kind of miffed on the inside because we didn't sing the songs that we wanted to sing for us. But maybe that's because there was somebody else in mind. We're trying to be inconvenient so that other people have a chance to really hear and understand and respond to the gospel. Maybe the programs don't look quite the way that we want to. And again, for me, this is just me speaking really personally. Whenever I'm asked to be inconvenienced, there's this nasty, petty little part of me that kind of rears its head and is like, you can have this when you pry it from my cold, dead hands. And I'm like, and the only thing that helps me fight against petty me is to remember that end goal, to remember that it's worth it, to remember that what we're called to do is so worth it because we're doing this not just for the sake of doing it, but so that someone else has an opportunity to truly live. In just a minute, we're going to sing a last song together. But before we do that, I want to close today with a challenge to you all. I want us to go back to where we started with that video. That video that we saw at the start of the sermon is really all about people who have sacrificed for our sake, right? People who were inconvenienced for our sake. Maybe it was somebody who invited us here or somebody who took the time, took the initiative for us to be here. So what I want to challenge you to do today is really simple. I want you to find a few minutes at some point this afternoon where you can stop and you can think and you can reflect back on your life. And just think about the different people over the years who have sacrificed so that you can be where you are today, who have willingly taken on inconveniences so that you can be in the position that you are in today. We all have people who've done that for us. None of us got here on our own. So what I want to encourage you to do is try to identify that person. And once you've done that, I just want you to take the time to thank them, right? Go see them in person if they're here close by. Call them. Write them a handwritten thank you note if you need to do that. But take the opportunity to thank them. Just say, I understand that you made a sacrifice. You were inconvenienced for me, and this is the difference that has made in my life, and I wanted to say thank you. And once you've done that, I want you to kind of turn your attention from the past to the future. And just think, okay, who is out there that I might sacrifice for? Who is out there that might give me an opportunity to kind of pay that forward? And then just ask yourself the question, what will it look like this year for you to do for others what others have done for you? What is it going to look like this year for you to do for others what others have done for you? For the sake of the gospel, so that others may live. Just keep that question in mind as we pray. God, thank you for the opportunity to be here together today. Just to be reminded of the fact, Lord, that we all are where we are because people sacrifice. Now, where we are spiritually, physically, emotionally, financially, God, none of us stands on our own. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And Lord, thank you for the opportunity to just simply stop and reflect on who has given, who has sacrificed, who has invested so that we can be where we are. So God, I just pray that as we leave today, you would help us live in an appropriate posture of thankfulness for that, just recognizing the investments and sacrifices that others have made for us. And then God, out of that position of thankfulness, I just pray that you would open our eyes to what you are calling us to do, to pass that along to others. Help us answer that question well. What will it look like for us to do for others what others have done for us? For the sake of the gospel, so that others may find life in you. Amen.